It's the second one. So today I welcome all of you to this second webinar of ICSA. And I will share with you in the beginning now a few slides before we jump into this exciting presentation to give you a few information on ICSA, whoever does not know ICSA yet, the International Communal Studies Association. Yeah, ICSA is around already for 40 years. So we're celebrating the 40th anniversary this year. And yeah, here, of course, the website is the most important information for you, ixacommunity.org. And we hosting conferences every 2 or 3 years since the beginnings. On the website, you will find a lot of information also on the past conferences. You can become a member, or maybe some of you are already, I'm sure. So, and this membership includes a newsletter, bulletin, and the webinars. Also, these webinars here for free, and a digital subscription to Communities magazine, and reduced fees for the conferences. And the next live conference is in more than a year in Germany. So we will, in the end, we will have some information more on this, and also on the following webinars in May and July. So, and here's the small printed here on the membership fees. You will find all this on our website. And yeah, I'm really happy. I'm part of the ICSA board also, and we have a lot of very long-term ICSA members here in our webinar today who are ready to discuss with you together. And I'm really grateful to be part of this international association. So in this webinar series, we have already today, the Eco-Village Resilience, and last time it was about intentional communities and social change. And you can find the recordings of these webinars also on the website when you are a member. You have access to this, or you can get a paid access. Yeah, okay. So for now, I stop here. We have some more information in the end. And I hand over to Taisa, who will introduce our presenter for today.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Iris. I have the pleasure to introduce Anna Kovasna. I'll start in a very informal way because Anna and I worked together for many, many years at the Global Eco Village Network. And we have been working together in projects and traveling to climate conferences to represent Jen and many, many other adventures. But Anna is leading the Global Eco Village work on resilience and climate change. And she's working with communities around the world to research, strengthen, and scale community-led responses to the climate crisis. Anna serves as co-chair of the Transition Network. She's a trustee of Gaia Education. She previously served as the lead of Gen Strategy and Coordination Circles, and also as the Education and Research Director. She's passionate about cross-movement collaboration and shared governance. And I could continue on, but I think that's it for now. And Anna can continue introducing herself and this amazing project. When the webinar team, when we were talking about interesting topics, we thought about community resilience. And in the current time, it's very important to think about resilience. And I want to hear from you, Anna. How did it all start? How did you have this idea? I know you are the one co-creating this project since the beginning. Over to you and welcome. I would just say it would be super nice to hear where are you all calling from, because I know we have a very international audience. So to warm up, if you are able to let us know on the chat, where are you calling from? It will be nice. I'm calling from Rio, from Brazil. And the chat will be open if you have questions during the session, just so you all know. Anna will have about 30 minutes to present, and then we will open for questions. And we'll be happy to, if you have the question, you can just write it down there. We can collect later on. Fantastic. Australia, US, Norway, Rio, Scotland, California, Switzerland, UK, Germany, Israel. Wonderful. You are all very welcome. Austria. Welcome, everyone. Over to you, Anna. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Taisa. I'm just going to start my timer so I don't speak for too long, because I'm very excited to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation. Always a pleasure to share with all of you, and yeah, to speak about one of my passions into this space. And it's sweet also, you know, seeing who's here in the room. Like Taisa is an all-time colleague. And I see there are people from Israel, and also my dear friend and teacher Diana is here, whom I first met during an eco-village design education at Kibbutz Hukuk in Israel. So I feel like nice kind of weaving of realities. So I'm going to talk to you about a strand of work that I've been engaged with now actually since 2021. And that has to do with resilience and the resilience of sustainable communities, right? And I'm going to share, I have a presentation I'm going to share with you. I'm also going to put the link to it directly in the chat. It's a view link. If you prefer to look at it like that, you can go back and forth. You can copy text, whatever you need to do, that should work. But otherwise, I'll share my screen. And I'm going to talk a little bit about like why this topic, because I know you're a bunch of researchers. I'll tell you a little bit about like our methodology, how we set the whole thing up, and then get into results. And hopefully we can have an interesting discussion towards the end of it. So let me find my screen share. Oops. And if I speak too fast, which I do sometimes, just write in the chat and tell me to slow down. I can see the chat while I'm talking, so that's there. And I like seeing you, so just going to organize my screen so that I see a few more of you. There we go. All right, so the project that I've been doing and the report that came out of it was called Eco-Village Resilience: Collective Pathways for Navigating the Polycrisis. And that's kind of exactly what it is. So it came out of this feeling from me engaging in the Global Eco-Village Network for maybe a decade at many different levels of scale, thinking that there are all of these now like sustainable communities that were set up like from, you know, say the 60s and on. They were kind of set up in a world that I don't feel is really alive anymore. I felt like many eco-villages were set up to be sustainable in a context, in a global situation that has fragmented and that's kind of collapsing in different ways. So I was really curious about how can eco-villages adapt to this new reality and continue to give what they are giving in the world, even though the systems we're working in and the things that we were working for is maybe now less and less possible. So that was kind of my personal inquiry, right? How can eco-villages continue to be these beacons of hope and positive transformation while also navigating the effects of climate change and polycrisis? So the heart of the project really came from there, like looking at how resilient are eco-villages actually to really bad climate change. Like we were looking at an at least 2.5 degree scenario, which starts to be, we really start to see like the effect of big tipping points, and also starting to look at polycrisis, so the interlinked nature of global crises, from wars to, fuel shortages to climate change and biodiversity loss and all of that. And then looking at what can eco-villages do to become more resilient in this, and how can Gen have a role in that? Like, what can Gen as a network do to build resilience more broadly, not just in the eco-villages, but actually in the regions that we are also part of? So, guided by that, we had a project, nicely funded, very generously, and thankful from the VCAN Rasmussen Foundation. And we ran from November 21 to May 24. And we did a few different things. Like, these were kind of our aims, right? We wanted to do an assessment of the social ecological resilience and transformative potential of a group of eco-villages, and really understand the strengths and the weaknesses of current practices and how they can be adapted. We wanted to build capacity within Gen through knowledge sharing, knowledge co-production, and to strengthen the whole kind of our sense of agency and capacity within the network. We also wanted to learn about and share ways of building personal and interpersonal resilience, and reflect on how these two things are connected. And I'll get into a little bit more about how we were thinking about resilience, like what do we mean when we say resilience. And we wanted to start an adaptation of the eco-village model to the climate crisis that was grounded in, this research as well as our sense making. So we created a project, and when I say we, so I was the lead, but we were a core team of 5 people from different disciplines, including academics as well as like facilitators and people from the network. So we were already doing, I would say, some interesting bridging of fields, capacities, and preferences in our core team. But we had 4 strands. We did a resilience assessment. So that's really an assessment of the social ecological resilience of eco-villages. We did what we called a deep dive, which was more facilitating, like sitting with the reality of severe climate change or polycrisis and all of that means. Like, what are the capacities that lets us be with that reality? How can we nurture our kind of inner and social like muscles for actually letting that in and using that as a transformative or force for transformation, right? Instead of just collapsing or being only intellectual about it or keeping it at arm's length. And based on both of those, so based on like a sober kind of assessment of the resilience, a deep dive into capacities for being with that reality and for building resilience internally and as groups, we wanted to look at visions and pathways for the future. Like, what does it really mean to walk as an eco-village into the future in the coming decades? And then we wanted to both build capacity within our community of practice, but also create resources that let us share that on as we continued. Then who were we? So we worked with 20 eco-villages and representatives from each of the 5 regional networks of Gen. So Gen is divided into kind of continent-based networks: there's South America, North America, Africa, Europe, and Asia, Oceania. So we had members of all of those networks, as well as 20 eco-villages. And we wanted to have an even distribution of geographies or within those regions. The way it worked is that people applied. So we put out, the call, eco-village applied to join, and we selected eco-villages based on the set of criteria that you can see here. We wanted to have 4 from each region, so that's like from each continent. We wanted them to have at least 20 full-time residents, at least 10 years of existence since founding. We wanted them to have capacity to participate online, because a lot of our research happened online. And we wanted them to have alignment with Gen's understanding of an eco-village, which is participatory, it's bottom-up, and it's holistic. It involves like social, ecological, economic, and cultural regeneration there. And we needed 2 people from the community that was committed to the entire process of the project. And in the end, we ended up with 1 urban community, and that's Earth Song in New Zealand. We had 19 rural or peri-urban communities. We had a wide range of climates, which felt really important, also from Arctic to temperate to tropical and semi-desert. Since we're looking at climate change, we wanted to have a kind of biotope diversity. And we had inland and coastal communities. And you can kind of see the map there and the countries that we ended up with. In the end, we had communities from 18 countries and representatives from a few more. So that was us together. And what did we get up to? With 2 people from each of these communities, some of them more, some had, bigger teams locally. We were an online community of practice of about 50 people, and we met 23 times 2 because our time zones don't match. So we doubled everything that we did. Like we did a session that's sort of stretched across the Pacific and a session that stretched across the Atlantic, and that way we could kind of involve more people. We also had simultaneous interpretation into French, I will say that here, in all of our session and all of our work, which allowed us to work with some rural communities in Africa, in Francophone Africa, which was really, for me, quite groundbreaking. We hadn't done that before. And the way we set the thing up, we basically did, could call it like a decentralized or distributed research process. So we would gather together in the community of practice and do a kind of online training in data gathering or how to hold a workshop for a particular topic that we needed data on. People would then go to their communities and hold this local workshop or gather this data, but in a participatory way together with their communities. They would do some reflection with their team and feed that back into our knowledge management system, which was really cool. I can tell you a little bit more about that. And then we would come together again for storytelling and sharing between the communities to really weave this understanding across the network, across geographies and across distance or difference. And then we would use that to co-create some resources, materials and indicators for resilience that I will explain a little bit more. And I'd say all of these were very important. It felt like we were like a jellyfish, kind of pumping in and out, and really involving people in the communities, but also across. And I think one of the beauties was that we were very, very diverse there, and they were traditional communities. In Ghana, traditional eco-village is basically a village that is not an intentional community, right? It's an already existing village who chooses to live as an eco-village, chooses to adopt sort of sustainable and holistic and participatory methods, but it wasn't co-created by people explicitly for that purpose from the beginning. So that was it. And yeah, our data gathering, which I'm happy to share with you at some point, because I think it was really great. We set up a system where everybody in the community of practice had access to everybody's results and reflections throughout, and where we could build each eco-village's kind of diary or kind of case for resilience as we went along, all completely transparently, which felt like a really good, for me, innovation. All right. A little bit more about what we did. So first, the assessment of social ecological resilience of communities. For this strand, or for the whole project, but she was leading the strand, we partnered with Alison Quinlan, who is from the Resilience Alliance. She's a long-term expert in community resilience assessment and resilience thinking, and we were really lucky to have her. And we had her because I called Stockholm Resilience Center and I was like, hey, we're a network of communities and we really want to investigate our resilience. Who should we work with? Who should we talk to? And they told me afterwards that they never had somebody like me call them at the university and be like, come and work with us. So that was pretty cool. So we were working with Alison, and thus we were really grounded in resilience thinking, in that kind of school of thought that you see coming from Stockholm Resilience Center, Resilience Alliance, and people associated with that. So we defined social ecological resilience as the capacity of a social ecological system to sustain well-being in the face of disturbance and change by buffering shocks and adapting and transforming in response to change. So really looking at communities as systems that involve both social and ecological elements. So taking a very holistic and systems-based view, which works very well with an eco-village kind of perspective, because we also like to think in systems. Really important to point out the resilience of what to what, because resilience can mean very many things. And in this case, it really was of eco-villages to a scenario of at least 2.5 degrees global warming, right? So that's kind of the situation. You could look at the resilience of, my flock of chickens to predator attacks. It's perfectly possible, but probably with a very different set of indicators than that. So that feels important. And the activities we did. So these are, when I said we came together to kind of train people to then go out and do workshops. These are the workshops that we did. We started with a historical timeline, which is a way of getting a community to look at what has already happened and identify kind of points of crisis and resilience, and to start to understand their own history as a story of overcoming challenge and of the particular resources and strengths that they have, right? So that's where we started. Then we went on to system models, which is basically understanding our communities as systems. So drawing systems maps of the community, identifying key elements, how they're connected together, right? Moving on to thresholds and tipping points was about understanding what in that system that we have kind of mapped and drawn, like what are the points of no return where things will tip, where there will be tipping points? What are the external influences that could cause that? So maybe we live in, we live in a place that's at risk of increasing drought because of climate change. So what would that look like? What would be the cascading effects in our local systems from those big global changes? So it was about understanding the big pictures of thresholds and tipping points in the global climate system, and then understanding the social, ecological, economic effects on our systems very specifically, right? And then from there, we have a kind of understanding of the world we're moving in and the world we're looking at. We looked at future pathways, like what are reasonable actions and plans that we can take now in order to keep our option space open. So when these things happen, how can we act in time? How would it look like to be us? What do we need to implement? What do we need to do? And what's our vision for moving into this future that lets us keep as much agency as we can? That's what I mean here. It says understanding attributes of resilient systems and maximizing option space. It's that. And I found that a really inspiring take on resilience. That resilience is not just about coping or kind of hunkering down, but it's actually about keeping space for options so that when things happen, we are not locked into a single pathway without choice. We still have, even if it's limited, we still have some choice. And then finally, we developed a set of resilience indicators together with the communities and the community of practice. And I'll tell you a little bit more about those in a bit, because they were an important piece of co-creation. Then kind of weaving with that, we were exploring inner and interpersonal resilience, right? And it looked a little bit differently, a little bit sort of softer there. But we defined it as the ability of individuals and social networks to cope, right? So taking a more kind of relational and inner take on resilience. And really wanted to weave this in because we wanted to increase our ability to respond effectively, act in solidarity, and recover from disasters and function well, even in crisis, right? And we used it also within the community practice to kind of build community and safe space, like really having a space where we can share. So a lot of the work happened in the relationships within the community of practice. But we also mapped capacities in the communities of like what communities feel make them resilient in this way. We tried to nurture skills in attending to social issues and dynamics, and also skills for kind of growing well-being there. So what we did, we looked at a tree model, which is a bit like an iceberg model. So we looked at root causes for symptoms. So to kind of help communities to look deeper into what's happening in the dynamics and tricky things that are going on. We looked at connection to land as a source for resilience. We looked at system sensing as a way of kind of uncovering hidden dynamics and speaking about difficult things in community in a kind of held way. And then each community did an exercise where they were mapping their abilities and capacities and their gaps in abilities and capacities in relation to inner and interpersonal resilience. So we came up with, kind of a shared map of strengths, weaknesses, and gaps. And here are people doing workshops so that you know that there were actually real people involved in this project. So here you have people in Togo, in Gambia, in Germany, in Italy, in Mexico, and in Bangladesh, doing some workshopping. And you can see some of the materials we gathered. You have an example of the timeline at the top corner there, that's from Colombia. You have a systems map of Keuru Eco-Village in Finland, looking at, their mapping. So this is a little bit like how the type of things, we ask people to do. You can see the people in Mexico, in Huehuecoyotl here, they are doing a Three Horizons workshop. So we use the Three Horizons framework, which some of you probably are familiar with, to look at future pathways. Here's another example of a timeline. So people could take pictures. They could also work online with different tools. And we then had a system of like forms and feedback mechanisms that people could use to give us their information. Great. So I'm going to move a little bit into, we're edging towards results there, but here. I told you that we developed some indicators for community resilience, and I think these might be of interest to you, and I'll, give you links to where you can see them, work with them, and all that, because what we did is we took key attributes of resilience from resilience thinking and resilience research. This is from social ecological resilience, right? That are diversity, redundancy, balancing connectivity, inclusion, equity, feedback loops, and adaptive learning. And these are things that have come out of like decades of research into resilience of social ecological systems that are kind of key attributes of resilient systems, right? And then we broke those down into indicators like habitat, diversity of habitats, conservation, ecosystems, food, livelihoods, and social diversity, for an example. Redundancy, so having backups for energy, food, fresh water, insurance, critical skills, stuff like that. And then we developed scales for communities to kind of see how much they were embodying or realizing these different indicators. And we created an online tracker that's open for everybody to use. So you're very welcome to take a look at it there. And these were really cool. I mean, the structure comes from academia, right? It comes from research, but the content and the way that we phrase things came from the communities and us together, and also from my background and knowledge of Jen. And you have a little unreadable, it's just for you to look at the colors down. You can see a little bit of the results there. You can see, for an example, that actually well, it's easy to see, for an example, here in redundancy, where my marker is there's quite a lot of red, right? Whereas here, this is inclusivity and equity is quite a lot of green and yellow. So we got this like really quick snapshot. I'll show you more of the results later, but it was really useful for us to get a quick sense of where our 20 communities were at, and this will be available to you. And then a final thing we did, we took all of those indicators that we did and we put them next to the eco-village map for regeneration, which is kind of like the core model or DNA of eco-village design that we're using. And the eco-village map is divided into social, ecological, economical, and cultural regeneration, and has a central pathway of whole systems design. And we just kind of mapped it and saw, okay, where are we speaking to each other, like between eco-village design and social ecological resilience? Where is the eco-village model going beyond what resilience thinking is saying? And where are there gaps in the eco-village model? And this was really interesting also to see. And it was also interesting to see that actually our mapping there matched our results from the resilience assessments and our findings. But that was also an integral part of what we did and how we used those indicators. So I'm going to move on to our key findings. So these are our key findings for social ecological resilience, right? And again, you'll have these slides, excuse all the text, but you'll have it and then you can also read it. But the first one is, so many of the practices already in place in eco-villages are important and they contribute to resilience, but they are not enough in the kind of context and pathway that we were looking at. So for climate change or global warming of 2.5 degrees or more, that is so disruptive that what eco-villages are doing today, even in the best case scenario, if they're like in that model, is not enough, right? And that was true for the eco-villages also. We also saw that actually the knowledge of climate change impacts and risk is quite limited, not in the abstract sense, like we all know it's happening, but how it's affecting like my local place, my community, my region in a tangible way. That was not very easy for people to really get a grasp on and get their hands on. And not many communities had sort of great ways of integrating information about regional changes into their plans. So it's like a disconnect between we know climate change is happening, but we're not necessarily planning for it or taking it into account in a very tangible way. So that was one. We found a great strength throughout the research that eco-villages, maybe not so surprising for those of you who know them, are really good at having an experimental and creative mindset and really value that. So they value and nurture that. And that's a real asset that can be leveraged to come up with new solutions, right? That can be used like for this creative navigation that we need. We also found that community cohesion and the shared motivation to work together, together with the knowledge of individual skills and capacities, is an important strength. So the communities like know how to come together, they know who knows what, they know how to really like bring that knowledge together, right? And have high levels of social trust. What's missing is kind of more, how can I say, less relational and maybe more like instrumental tools, like having early warning systems and emergency response protocols. So that was a weakness. We saw that very few communities, at least at the level of the eco-village, have that type of thing in place in a very living way. To my great joy, my own community, Findhorn, has since implemented an excellent resilience plan, and that's now being, communicated in the Rainbow Bridge, our newspaper, in every issue that's coming out. But it's there. And moving to the second column, we found a great weakness in food systems. So diversity and redundancy of food systems seemed really low across a lot of the communities, and that's in terms of how much food they produce, but also how it's sourced. So everything from like seed banks to regional food supply chains and food production, that looked quite weak, and something that really our network could work to improve. Then eco-villages are very busy places, which I think if you've ever visited one, you'll probably know people are doing a lot of things and there's a lot of creativity and ideas, but a lot of it is a bit ad hoc. And a lot of it comes down to individual motivation. There isn't that much strategic planning that's rooted in evidence and dialogue, and that really identifies priorities and like how to a sequencing of actions. That really rang true for me as an eco-villager. Like we're super creative and do a lot of stuff. But what I said before of like how to really strategically meet the challenge and plan for that, that was a little bit weaker. We also found, not surprisingly, that every community's resilience is linked to that of its region. So to work effectively, we need to work at least a bioregional level of scale. And then finally here, that reciprocity and the sharing of resources is really high within communities. And that's something that can be developed and expanded. That knowledge as well as the practice and the ethics could be expanded to include our bioregions, for an example, as well as within the broader kind of global network. So those were some of the takes from there. I'm going to give you a snapshot of this is like, again, how we looked at the resilience attributes and indicators, where we could see that, we were actually good in diversity. It's like habitat diversity, biodiversity, and livelihoods looked good. Food, not so good. Redundancy, like really not great at food security and emergency plans. So this is a little bit how we also navigated our ways around. It's just a different way of saying part of what I already said in the other slide. But it was very helpful to have such a clear map of things for us to track ourselves around. All right, so inner and interpersonal resilience. For me, this was an interesting one because it's, I think, two things. One was almost everybody emphasized the importance of continually choosing to show up. Like this kind of resilience is not something that's automatically there or not. Like we have to work on it and we have to always show up. We have to do our own practice. We have to show up for our neighbors and our community members, and we have to show up for relationships, right? So that was really strongly kind of put there. Like I have to consciously show up for people and for myself. Also really clear was that the practices and capacities where eco-villages are strong, they are really linked to the needs of community living. I mean, that's kind of self-evident, but it shows to me that because of the way that eco-villagers choose to live, they have to develop certain muscles like nurturing trust, for an example, improving skills in communication and governance, building strong social cohesion, having shared vision, like this capacity for collective action. These are things that eco-villages define themselves as like this really contributes to our resilience, right? As networks and as people. But of course, it also is necessary for living in the way that we've chosen to live. Same with creative and collective problem solving that kind of goes together with the capacities I said before. We also found the past crises have tended to bring communities closer together, which is nice, but in an ad hoc way, you know? So it's that capacity to respond quickly in an ad hoc way is high, but again, maybe not so much planning. Nature connection was really important to how people thought of their own resilience. So that's everything from nature connection practice to conservation to regenerative agriculture or anything like that. So it's a real interface between social ecological resilience building and personal and interpersonal resilience building. Is kind of focusing on nature connection and interdependence as a key aspect. Of course, that's also central to eco-villages. And then the culture and spiritual practices and beliefs play an important role, both in fostering inner resilience, but also in fostering stewardship. So to really explicitly build in culture and spiritual practices, that can be ceremony, ritual, it can be singing, can be deep ecology work, anything, but that was also showing up as really strong. Let's see. I'm looking at my time, so I'm going to be a little bit quick. So these are, some of our conclusions about strengths. Again, the sustainable practices that are there are really important. Knowing how to build social trust and social cohesion, really important. Having a strong sense of collective agency, great. Having an experimental mindset, having the strong ethic of reciprocity and sharing, centering ecosystem stewardship, having a shared purpose that emphasizes social and ecological well-being and care, actively training and practicing skills like communication, conflict resolution, governance, stuff like that. The capacity to collectively and individually assume responsibility, like we are the people and we're doing it, that showed up as a strength. Valuing a diversity of practices for interdependence with nature, and understanding the value of creative expression, art, spiritual belief, celebration, and ceremony for resilience, all came out as strengths. There are some learning opportunities and knowledge gaps. So the potential impacts and risk of climate change regionally and how to really be with that. Really understanding our own community resilience, like how can we learn about that in a better way? And how can we connect more between each other to learn, you faced drought already, you faced salinization of soils, like in your place, the trees all died. Like, what did you do? We have such an opportunity to learn from each other because we are all living through some version of the polycrisis already, some much more than others. Yeah. And finally, some of the growing edges of what we found, like recommendations for what to do next. It's really to put in place backup systems for key systems. So we found, I said redundancy is a bit low. People have, say, alternative energy systems, but not a backup for those. So if our solar panels fail, maybe we don't have anything else to really rely on. Maybe we have one main water source, but we don't have a functioning backup system for that. So a lot of redundancy, also like in terms of infrastructure, but also in terms of skill. Like how many people know how to facilitate meetings or cook or take care of the kids or, do first aid. So that felt really, really important. Increasing food security that I already said feels like an essential next step. Shortening and diversifying supply chains. And these are all things that we try to do, but it's hard, it's hard to like shift our economic system, right? A little bit of improving attention to ecosystem connectedness. So we do a lot of like habitat restoration, but maybe haven't thought enough about the importance of the migration of plants and animals, especially when biomes shifts or when things go extinct in one place and need to move to another place. Putting in place early warning systems so that we have in the communities ways of warning each other to take action before it's too late to protect, our animals, our families, our friends, our property, all of that. having emergency response and actually having a plan for like where do we shelter, how do we communicate, where is our food and water in case of emergency. I know some of you definitely in this room will have that, but some of us really don't. And same with monitoring systems. So this is a little bit what I was coming to. Like we're good at like ad hocing and kind of having a good sense and a good feeling, but how can we like know when our local system is coming close to a tipping point so we can act before that? So what are the indicators that we need to look at socially and ecologically in my particular community, right? That can give us, and that can be anything from like conflict to drought to, I don't know, mining companies intruding. It could be anything like that, right? And to work with that data to kind of plan for future scenarios, right? So working more with strategic planning, but in a situation of uncertainty. Looking a bit at learning, not as like education for sustainable development, but as a shared practice that's necessary for navigating uncertain times. That's another like little shift. Like a lot of eco-villages do education, but how much are we really like using education and learning as a way to co-navigate in uncertain times? And then finally to build stronger regional relationships, because that's really clear. I do have some, I'm not going to speak to it. I'm going to just give you this, because if you go to this ecovillage.org/resilience, you can find like a full report on everything we did. You can find the methodology. You can find the tracker with the indicators that I spoke about, and a lot of other things. You can listen to a podcast. So there's lots of resources that we kind of developed and did. And we do have some next steps that we're already working on, but I'll save those for the questions. And I'll drop that link in the chat also right now.
I put it there ready.
Great.
Wonderful. Wow. Thank you, Anna. It's very, yeah, a shower of hands to Anna. Thank you for sharing it with us. It's huge work, lots of insights, and I'm sure we have questions. We do have some questions on the chat, but I promised it I would start with some questions from the team. So whoever is ready to ask the first question. Jan, over to you.
I found this really inspiring, and I see this could be the first in a series of looking at the different kinds of resilience. I'm thinking of disaster. I'm thinking of politics, and we have two examples of eco-villages in a war situation, both in the Ukraine and in Israel. And I also see the whole thing of crises as being community builders. I think that's something I know that I've experienced that in the communities that I've lived in. And lastly, I think a historical thing, we have examples of migrations of intentional communities due to political and social crises. Right back to 1,000 years ago when monasteries were attacked by my ancestors from Norway. And also when the pietists were kind of oppressed by the Catholic and Protestant establishment hundreds of years ago. The migrations of communities from Europe to Australia, North America, 200 years ago. We have a number of examples of that where each of them would illustrate what you illustrated about communities' response to the climate change. And they would show different aspects. So I think this could be the first of a long series of really good research on why intentional community really is an answer to the multiple crises that we face today, not just the climate crisis. So thank you very much. I was very inspired. If I was younger, I would start doing research on this.
Thanks, Jan. I think I would ask back to, like, what if there's nowhere to run to, you know? Because I feel like that's where we're at the moment. Like there's nowhere. I mean, sure, we can like migrate to a slightly safer place, but sooner or later it's going to come and get us, right? So what do we do when we can't move? Like how do we use what we have and those strengths that you point to kind of shift the systems around us when exit is not an option?
Actually, I would challenge that. I would say that we as human beings have been here long enough to have been through serious climate changes. 10,000 years ago, where I'm sitting now, we were sitting under 2 kilometers of ice. We survived here. So there's always a place to run to. The trouble is, if a lot of people are running to the same place, you've got a problem.
Mm.
But we have survived far worse than 2.5 degrees change, far worse. And we'll continue to survive because we are smart and we work together.
Except for when we don't. When we
True.
kill each other instead. Yeah. But yes.
We got to stop doing that.
Yes.
Working on it.
Yeah, but I also agree. I mean, it is the beginning of, we're already continuing our work, right? So we're kind of expanding what we did in that project, partly to scale by empowering the community of practice that was there to go out into their regions to kind of give trainings, do resilience assessments, and like share and spread the word. Also sharing through the Gen network by involving the regions more and continuing the research. So we're now looking at some of those knowledge gaps that I mentioned, right? We're now looking at how can we help communities to contextualize like global risk into locally actionable plans and future scenario planning, like what would be tools for that. We're looking at early warning systems that communities can implement without the involvement of like the state or other agents. Like I really like when it's in our hands, you know, like that we can do it together, not relying on other instances. We do it in the community. So we're doing that. We're looking at preparedness and first response, as well as the use of art and story and these kind of creative practices, because that showed up as such a strength. And trying to really look at all of that within the context of how can communities be, I call them keystone communities. So like as a keystone species upholds an important function for the health and well-being of their ecosystem and their entire system. Like how can a community be a keystone community in its bioregion, upholding the cultural, social, and ecological well-being of its whole place, right? To be that kind of stronghold and safety net when things are becoming harder. So that's a little bit where we're going next. Iris.
Yeah, thank you, Anna. It was really very great project, I think, and especially what you have done, the teachings, the courses, and the international network and the international exchange about all these best practices in the case of polycrisis, I would say. And yeah, I wonder now, because you had these 20 cases around the globe and quite in so different cultural, political, and also geographical areas. So, and I wonder, did you work also on the how these eco-villages respond to their local and specific crisis? Because I guess there might be very different with the cases. And so these eco-villages are there for teaching also other local communities, is this right? Like as best practice forerunners, or I don't know, pioneers. And because I think the toolbox that you were coming up with in the end, with all these community building resilience, this is so holistic and wonderful. And I also wondered a bit, like Jan, so it's referred to this climate change 2.5 degrees, which is just one little aspect. I mean, the poly crisis is so much more. It's also about poison in agriculture, is about land ownership, yeah, shifting towards the richest, and so on and so forth. I think we don't need to talk about this in detail. But I wonder, is this focus on the 2.5 degrees, was it to meet the requirements of the funders? Because this is quite, of course, at the moment, I know that it's really difficult to get anything else funded, expect climate change topic projects. So
Yes,
it was,
and like the funder is very polycrisis focused, or was. But partly was. So this is how we're thinking about it. We did in the project talk about climate change and polycrisis like together a lot. Our feeling was that when we start talking about all the different interlinked crises, sometimes we forget about climate change, and sometimes we forget that like if we solve all those other things, we're still screwed because there's still climate change, right? So that's a little bit like why we chose that one, because even if we had no wars, like we would still have climate change and we would still be screwed. So there's something like that, but also because of course the drivers of crisis are really interlinked. You know, we can see that with like, carbon emissions going up because of the war in Ukraine, which was about, so there is such an interlinking also there. And of course, the consequences of climate change are not ecological. They are also social, and they are cultural as we are displaced. They are economic as our economic system collapses. So it is actually broader than it feels. So we're not talking about like ecology when we're speaking about climate change. We chose it as the kind of biggest kind of fundamental destabilizer in a sense that does influence all of these other pieces, and that augments social tensions that are already there, for example, as like water gets scarce or whatever it might be. So like yes and no, and also analytically it's like easier. But if you were to look at like the maps that people did and what we were speaking about, I mean, it's everything from like, because that was your other question, did we work with specific? Yes, that was the whole point, to like understand what are the specific effects here, like where I live. So some people worked on like a community in the Gambia. One of their biggest threats is sand mining. So they have like incredible social erosion and salinization of soils because people are stealing all their sand, like, and shipping it off to somewhere else to like make concrete. So that's their main challenge, with it, and the kind of corporatization of their world that comes from that. If you look at the other communities, they were looking at drought, for example, like all of the communities, they mentioned social, economic, and ecological factors. Many also brought up cultural challenges like losing traditional stewardship practices as economies shift and people move, or subsistence patterns that have to change, for an example, and then you lose cultural heritage. So it was very, very interlinked and localized. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you, Anna. I saw you are already responding to some questions on the chat. Maybe we can get one more final question from the team and we open the circle. Beatriz.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you so much, Anna. It was very inspiring. I'm totally going to dig into that website. And I was wondering about this relationship between community and its immediate neighborhood. Did you notice, is there a relation that would express the communities that are more strongly interlinked with their surroundings? Did they show that they would be more resilient than those which are not? I mean, you mentioned there were traditional villages in transitioning to sustainability and regeneration. Are they well connected with their surroundings, or they can also be a little isolated from where they are? And if any of these communities are already put into practice during the project timeline and a strategy for resilience that was great or that didn't really work out? Thank you.
So that's great. So one is like did communities that are more connected show more resilience? Are traditional communities by nature more connected? And did any project implement the strategy during the project, right? So the first one, you can see some of the weaknesses there, like for an example, supply chains and food systems. Like if you're not connected to your local system, you are going to be less resilient, right? So it shows up in ways like that. I'm not sure I have a specific kind of that they were more or less resilient. I think it's more like a deep realization that the systems that we're part of course, they don't end at the edge of the eco-village, right? So if we're working for our resilience, we have to work with our local water cycle, our local politics, our local safety, security situation, whatever it might be. So it's more, I think more like that. Whether the traditional communities are more connected, I feel like I can't say, to be honest. I mean, maybe if people have been living there before. I think there's maybe a little bit less. Do you know how it can be in the beginning of an intentional community? In my experience, this is not from the research. It's like it takes quite a lot of energy and focus and effort to like get the thing off the ground. So to also have time to like talk to everybody outside is hard until you've been there for 30 years, and then you can kind of start to relax, you know, and do it and have like extremely nice farmers markets, like in Earth Haven, for an example, which I think you still have coffee and something was called. So I think it comes with age. So maybe there it's like a little bit less intense. You have the infrastructure there already and such. Some of the things that were initiated during the project, I mean, we're doing more of the implementation in the next phase. We're doing kind of local pilots based on people's assessments and stuff like that. So looking more at that. But one community, Earth Song, who are they're urban, right? So they're very embedded in a city. That's it. And they converted one of their spaces to a meeting place between their communities. So it's an open space that's available for the surrounding community as well as for the community there to meet and speak. And they put on a series of events and festivals explicitly with this kind of networking with their neighbors perspective. And our Finnish community that was there, they started a regional seed bank. So to increase food security within Finland, right? So it's a kind of regional Arctic seed bank. They can send you some seeds, Jan. They will fit you. So those are some of the examples that were there.
Thank you, Anna.
Yeah.
Bill, over to you. You need to open your mic. You're muted.
Am I now open? Okay, good. Anna, from my own research suggests that very few communities ever last long enough to have ecological sustainability as an issue. They're more of an internal sustainability, whether they can adapt to each other, to getting on to making decisions, to handling not domestic violence, but internal disputes and things. And I'm just curious, in your research, how did you find the interaction between these two levels? One is sort of almost micro and relatively short term. We're talking weeks, days, months or something. And the other is sort of almost eons. And were you also looking at that internal resilience aspect or more the external one all the time?
I'd say a little mix. I mean, if you were to look at the indicators, a lot of the things that it's not really like we're having conflict or we're breaking down, but indicators of resilience were things like having a good conflict resolution method that people know about and use. It's actively building trust and having a high level of social cohesion. It's having systems for sharing resources, for an example. So a lot of like what I would call like the social aspects of eco-villages, or maybe even that culture of kind of sustaining those bonds are there as indicators, because they are actually indicators, I mean, internally, but they are also indicators in the wider sense. Like if we have networks of trust that extend out of our community, we are also more resilient, but of course we need them also inside. So I would say we did a little bit both, and we did not explicitly go into like the longevity of eco-villages. And resilience in that sense, although some of our community practice members were really interested because they were like in the middle of an intergenerational fight in their community. So it was kind of on our agenda, but less in our, like when I said, you know, the resilience of what to what, we got to limit our inquiry in some way. And in this case, it was of eco-villages to polycrisis or climate change. Right?
Thank you.
And the floor is open. Alice.
Anna, I would like to reflect on 3 expressions that you brought up in your talk. The need to maximize optional space, the weakness for strategic planning, and redundancy with diversity. I am involved in a project in Ghana, and I would actually love to ask you if you would perhaps help me work through a concept for the Darwin Innovation Grant from the UK. And it would be, I have a clear point of view, but I love your language. You have a much better way of posing things than I possibly can. And actually, I wonder if that project would also help you address those weaknesses of the project, of your own massive project. The thing in Ghana has to do with syntropic farming, and it would involve OPC. I don't know if OPC participated in Ghana with your project. It's the Obrabibini Peace Complex. They are working on syntropic farming of palm oil, but they are also advising halva chocolate with cacao. And it would be a project combining introducing syntropic farming throughout Ghana, and combining it with information from Consortium Farmers Trade Africa, which is a business concept for marketing produce from the smallest farmers in Ghana. And it's completely on the position of strategic planning, because we are introducing syntropic farming, which is, I don't know, you know what it is? You know what syntropic farming is? Okay, we are introducing syntropic farming, going through the whole country, and introducing also this marketing concept, because in Ghana there's a huge problem with for the small farmers to market their products is a huge problem anyway. And I just wondered if it'd be possible to communicate with you, send you an email, let you know what it is in detail, and have some feedback, have some, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, send me. I have very limited time in the coming like 2 months, but I can give probably like a quick feedback and some pointers. You could probably also find some language in the report, in the resilience report.
Okay.
And but send me. I'll take a look at it. And in Ghana, we worked with Bomigo eco-village. It's a coastal traditional eco-village where Lovans, who you might know, is very involved. So that's
Lovans.
yeah. So Lovans was part of the project.
Lovans,
Thank you, Anna. And I will ask us to please focus on Anna's presentation and the topic of eco-village resilience. If there are any other questions, comments, I can see some more conversation going on the chat.
So Beatrice, yeah, I mean, a lot of the project was those like 46 online community practice meetings that basically were the communities sharing with each other what they were doing, what they were not doing, what they were realizing and learning. So that was a really big part of the setup of it, to weave that peer learning into the network more.
Oh, if I may add something to that question, did you find it was interesting when the communities that were located maybe in the same climate ranges exchanged among themselves, or it didn't really matter wherever they were?
I actually think what was most interesting was the most diverse, like the most opposite communities exchanging with each other. Yeah. And it's maybe not in terms of exchange of practice, but in the sense of actually understanding in like a relational embodied way what the world and what climate change and polycrisis looks like in a system sense through personal stories. Like by listening to the personal stories of people in very diverse contexts, the abstract reality of like of a systems level phenomena becomes alive and understandable and graspable and much more easy to empathize with and act on and support with. So I think that's actually the main game. There is also, you know, the people who set up the seed bank, they talk to our community in India who already had a great seed bank. But so more kind of on, so yeah, less actually around climate and kind of biome and more around maybe practices or simply learning.
Wonderful. Final round of questions, comments. Otherwise, you can find all the materials and Anna's presentation on the chat and on the project website. Bill, please.
I'll turn the bloody mic. Yes, got it. Anna, you've mainly talked about the results from your research, what you found out there now, and that's been fascinating, but also wondering to what extent you're able to turn this into, in a sense, consulting with groups, to advise groups that they would be more resilient both on the micro level and the macro level if they did X rather than Y, or these practices help you just get along even in the short term so you can make these long-term decisions. I mean, to what extent have you been able to help groups apply this, to learn about these sorts of things and on that short, because you can see I'm obsessed about the short-term level here, not just the long-term. Anyway, over to you, Anna. What are you doing?
Yeah, so I'd say that first cycle that I primarily talked about, so the project that we closed, that was really about kind of finding out, right? Having a really solid baseline from which to step out. And what we're doing now is partly that, what you're saying. So we're doing a round of, but I'm trying to kind of like outsource it or decentralize it as much as possible. So I'm not doing it. The people who are part of the community of practice are doing it, those who want. So we are running a series of their initiatives, right? But local trainings. We're also running trainings in each of the Gen regions for kind of sharing the tools, sharing the message, like understanding the kind of, well, concepts and tools and approach that's there. And I guess my hope is to, by getting it out there in the network and using the regions as well as the eco-villages as kind of hubs for learning and empowering that as much as possible, we can scale in the quickest way possible without making, like, I am often a bottleneck. So I try to like get myself out of that basically. But I mean, that would be my hope, that people pick it up and use it, and that Jen also kind of runs with it. I'm the person who like sniffs out the thing that I'm curious about and makes a project about it and learns something. And then I need to hand that over to the next person who scales it and turns it into an education thing and that makes it available everywhere. It's not my strength, but it's happening in that way. I'm hoping. So hopefully there'll be something in, well, you're in Brisbane.
Yes.
You should talk to Trudy Jurians, who is like, she's a core team member. She lives just north of Brisbane. So if you were interested in doing something locally or just have a sit down and chat, she's around. You could probably meet up with her.
Is that Crystal Waters?
No, she lives, she's starting a new community just up north from Brisbane.
Okay, I'm just curious. No, okay.
Mm.
I don't know her, but
We
I can
can
introduce you
connect.
because you're
Yeah.
you're like in the same place. So So probably great, but you're really right. Like, I mean, the hope is that it will be used. We'll introduce it at the Gen Europe gathering this summer, like in more so. But I'm mostly working through there. We've also, I mean, in Taisa's introduction, like I'm also involved in Transition Network, for an example, so also aiming to kind of scale through there. So really looking at other community networks to get it out there. And you're one, so please pick it up and bring it to your communities.
Wonderful. Jan, you're the
Yeah,
next.
this is a great conversation, and I'm so glad it's going to this thing where communities interact with their local environments. And here in Norway, we have now a national emergency response team, and that's very mainstream. And they have really got far now because they have advised people to go from a 3-day food bank in their private houses to a 7-day bank. So, that's big time. But I'm being a bit cynical because I find that local authorities don't seem to have any clue about what's going on in the world. And I'm wondering whether there is some way somebody's maybe looking into the idea of eco-villages, intentional communities, being a resource for their local authorities, in this thing of how to respond to crises. And I think that could be a breakthrough place, because generally we're seen as kind of weirdos, living out in the hills, and we've got sandals and stuff. And if we can show that our response is actually way ahead of what their response is, we know what's going on. We have started looking at this, and it's more than 7 days canned food in your cellar. I'd like to just put that out and say, is anybody looking into this? Is there any way we can work on this one?
I think that would be amazing. Do you know, like one of my favorite things to think about lately is I don't know if you know, there's a Danish scholar, Christian Lauta. He's a lawyer, and he studies disaster law from the beginning. But he wrote this fantastic book in Danish. If you read Danish, Jan, I encourage you to read it. And it's kind of like a synthesis of response to disaster, and like what do we actually see? What are the myths there, and what are kind of what we see? And he also touches on the disaster communitas, which I think you brought up earlier, like that's what actually
Can
happens
you put
often.
his name in the chat?
Yeah, I'll put his name in the chat. But what he says, that's my point, is like disaster is not, there's no such thing as natural disaster. They're all social, because it's a mix between like risk, exposure, and preparedness. Right? No, but in a way, right? So the degree of it. But he also says that what you see in disaster is that the things that were already there, they are magnified. So he's like the things that you want to carry you through hard times, have them in place and practice them already before. And I actually love this, speaking of communities. I was in a webinar like maybe 4 or 5 months ago with people from Earth Haven and Cielo after Hurricane Helene, right? And listening there and speaking about resilience from like my abstract perspective and from their experience. And it was such a beautiful example, because in Earth Haven, Diana, correct me if I'm wrong, but like you're used to cooking together and eating together, and to mobilize like that kind of collectiveness and resource. So what I heard from Brandon, I think, was like very quickly after the disaster struck, you were feeding the community from like a central place, and that kind of happened very quickly and spontaneously, and you kind of had the muscles in there. Whereas Cielo, they never eat together. It's like not something that they do. So when disaster struck, they couldn't eat together. They could not cook together and like manage that. And that's for me a really small example of that. Like, have the things in place already that you think are going to carry you through, whether that's supplying food for each other collectively, or it's the capacity to clear the roads, or whatever it might be. And I think that's essential in what you're pointing to, Jan, that there's like a muscle of togetherness and trust, consideration, and skills, really, that can be nurtured long before you need it, and then it's there, you know, when disaster strikes, and that's a better preparation than many other things, and even than my, you know, tins in the pantry.
Thank you.
Iris?
Yeah, maybe also a remark on this food resilience. So in Siebenlinden, we had, I mean, there's self-sufficiency to a high degree, like 75%, and so the gardens are there. So we had actually we talked about this also when I lived in Siebenlinden, and there was like approximately that we knew we have like in the case of emergency we have food for 2 weeks for the entire community, which is not absolutely bad, but yeah, well, however it is. And of course on the fields, so yeah, however, so this is definitely for a community which is organized very well in community food. It's much easier than for a community, yeah, which doesn't have yeah, a canteen or something together, for sure. And self-sufficiency, of course, is also a big part of it. Yeah, great. I guess Siebenlinden was also a case in your, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank
I
you.
don't know if Diana would like to bring a little bit of your practical experience, as Anna mentioned. We have a few more minutes before wrapping up.
Hello, everyone. I especially want to say hello to my old friends and colleagues, and you know who you are. Hello. We were managing to turn on a dime after Hurricane Helene, as I think you know if you've talked to Brandon and other folks here, Anna. Because we had a chainsaw crew and a tractor crew, we fixed our roads the very next day. They had craters into them 5 feet down, like looking into the Grand Canyon on a miniature scale. Because all our roads are adjacent to streams, therefore our roads became rivers and they eroded. But they were fixed by the next day by our people who already know how to do this and do this regularly, but not so intensely. Just as you said, Anna, we were able to start feeding everybody twice a day for 10 days, which we don't usually do. We were able to set up tents in our common green with healers from within the community and our nearby neighbors to offer emotional support and physical healing to people who felt traumatized or scared or who had any kind of physical problem from the hurricane or before that. And we were able to go out to our neighbors immediately and start helping them. First, we started helping all the neighbors we know, which is quite a few people, because we're like Findhorn. We're not just our own property and our own people, but we're the neighbors all around. And so we have a much wider eco-village than just our property and our people that are members here. And so we were able to help those neighbors we knew. And then we went out and helped neighbors we didn't know, spreading the word that, you know, good neighbors are good to have because we had all this capacity. So if that's what you were asking me, Taisa, thank you for asking.
Thank you for sharing. Wonderful. So we're heading towards the end. Okay, it's a comment or, yeah. Maybe you can share a bit more about the course and follow-ups and final inputs, Anna, so we can wrap up.
Yeah. So the online course that we made, it's basically like the process that we did with the inside of the project, but kind of catered to slightly differently. So it's the same sessions and basically guided through. We're going to pilot it now with regional cohorts. So that's Gen regions, holding like a community of practice within their region, all doing the course together and kind of bringing it there first. And then we're launching it as a course that anybody, like an individual, can take to just learn more about both social, ecological, and interpersonal resilience from an eco-village perspective and point of view, right? So that kind of holistic piece. So that's coming out. I think if you're in Jen's newsletter, which is the end of my presentation that you all have. Do sign up there because any news about the course and such things, they come out there. If you're a member of a community and you're interested in joining that regional cohort course, that would be amazing. That's also a way to enter our community of practice for this next cycle of the project, where we're looking at the other tools and developments and kind of scaling and building more capacity. So if you're interested in that and you're home in the community, it would be amazing to have you on board. In that way, we are just, it'll come out like in a week, like the announcement of that on our newsletter that you can kind of join in. So that would be great. And our follow-up project is called Keystone Communities, which is the kind of concept that I told you that I'm playing with, of how can a community act as a keystone in their regional social, ecological, cultural systems, and really working with social, ecological, as well as interpersonal resilience, from everything from culture and spiritual practice to ecosystem restoration. There is a link to it also there in the back. There isn't super much information yet, but there will be, local trainings, maybe in your regions. I don't know where all of you are. There will be some opportunities to take part in other ways. We'll have a new podcast season. So we're kind of trying to share what we're coming up with. Alison, Quinlan, and I are also hopefully writing an article soon about the indicators for community resilience. That will be a peer-reviewed thing. So that's also coming out. But I'll find the link to the Keystone Communities because you can read a little bit more there. Just give me a sec.
Wonderful. And maybe connect with some of the ICSA researchers to share the gaps in knowledge and research that you could find, so we can also contribute.
And do read the report. I mean, you're used to reading reports. You're not intimidated by an 80-page report full of colors and beautiful pictures. It's like reading a children's book for you. So please do take a look, because all of the key findings, the methodologies, like more description of the sessions, of the communities, and everything, it's there. So you can just download that off the website, and all the knowledge gaps and such is there. And you'll have a full list of those indicators and the scales that we used is also in that report.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Anna, for being here with us today, sharing all the knowledge and being part of this conversation. Thank you all for joining us, but I will first hand it over to Iris because we have some informs from ICSA.
Yeah, thank you very much, Anna, for this great presentation and this great project we could have an insight into. And thank you, Taisa, for hosting, facilitating the session. And yeah, we as ICSA, we hosted it together. And now I've prepared some final information for you for the next dates and how this can go on, where you can meet us the next time. This will be webinar number 3, which is on governance and dynamics of communal living. Myself, I will be the one facilitating it. And yeah, I can tell you, we have already 3 exciting presenters for the session here. And I won't tell you now, but you will read this on the ICSA newsletter, which you can sign up for, of course, too, if you haven't done that yet. And this will be on May 7th. And then we have the 40 years celebration of ICSA in July with 2 sessions. Maybe Jan, you want to say a few words on that? On July 1st and July 3rd as online sessions, because this year we have no conference in person, but we will do that online in July. Yeah, or I can say that. So July 1st, there is the session on looking back. So what has happened in the last 40 years with ICSA, with communal studies and the community, how has it developed? And then on July 3rd, we will looking forward, what is to become next. Yeah, this will be done by Jan Bang and Per Bartelt, and of course with many other ICSA members.
I can say a couple of words, and that is,
Yeah, please.
that the ICSA in those 40 years has changed from being really very research oriented to being a place where researchers meet activists. And that dynamic of people who are doing it and people who are researching, and often they're the same people, but that dynamic has been very, very powerful for us. And we really would like to spend that second session looking forward. What are the things of the future? And after this session that we've just heard now, I think we have lots of really great ideas that we could spin looking forward to how can the ICSA contribute to a powerful future for us. So, and anyway, I want to say thank you, Anna, for a great presentation today. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Yang, also for this inspiring statement. And finally, save the date already. This is more than a year ahead from now still. But in July 2026, we are planning the next ICSA conference in person. It will be in the Lebensgarten Eco Village in Germany. So, and the call for papers goes out soon. So, yeah, you will receive the email if you sign up for the newsletter. So great for having you here today. And yeah, wish you a wonderful day or night or what time zone you are ever in. And I hope to see you next time for our next webinar on May 7th. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna.
ICSA.
Thank you, Iris. Thank you, Anna. Thank you all
Yeah, thanks for having me.
joining
It was fun.
us. That's better for us to say goodbye. You can open your mics. Thank you so much for joining.
Bye-bye, Graham.
Thank you all. Goodbye.
So
See
you can save the
you.
chat already if you still some time
It's
to
all
chat.
it's all
But
saved.
want to have the links.
Right.
Mhm.